My name is Rihanna Putnam. I'm the Community Engagement Specialist for the Citizen Science Association. Thank you all for being on today to learn more about citizen science informing global policy. I have just a few notes and some housekeeping, and then I'll turn it over to Leah Shanley, our co-chair for the Law and Policy Working Group, to introduce the topic and our presenters. The Citizen Science Association is a member-driven the Citizen Science Association is a member-driven organization that connects people from a wide range of experiences around a shared purpose of advancing knowledge through research and monitoring done by, for, and with members of the public. Our efforts are concentrated into a biennial conference. Our next one is going to be in May of 2021, and I'll have a note about that in just a minute. We have a peer-reviewed journal that includes articles on a number of topics, including a special issue on policy that was put out last spring that you might find interesting. And we also have a number of member services, such as our working groups, online networking, and webinars like these. Our membership represents the multidisciplinary and multidimensional nature of the field. It includes project leaders, researchers, educators, and more. We're excited to be offering some new member features in the very near future, and now is a great time to sign up. You can find more information on our website. Our 2021 conference is going to look a little different next spring, as it'll all be online. Events scheduled throughout the month of May 2021 will engage practitioners, researchers, educators, data managers, and more in the sharing of ideas and innovations that make our field thrive. Events will include keynotes to inspire, workshops to learn, poster sessions to connect, networking sessions, and more. You can visit the CSA virtual event site for more details on how to submit a poster or a workshop abstract and share your work and build connections across the field. Our abstract deadlines are going to be in early January, and so if you are interested in sharing, I encourage you to check out the website and learn more. This webinar was coordinated by our Law and Policy Working Group. The Law and Policy Working Group is one of 9 working groups that explore cross-cutting issues like data and metadata, evaluation, ethics, and more. Our working groups are one of the key ways we work to advance the goals of the CSA through the sharing of resources, best practices, relevant information, both among group members and also to the broader citizen science community through webinars like these and other public resources. Our working groups are a great place to look for connections and to dig deeper into topical areas of citizen science. You can find out more on our website. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to a YouTube playlist sometime next week. We have a growing number of webinar recordings available there, including many from a series that our Law and Policy Working Group hosted last year, or I guess earlier this year. It's still 2020. What a long year. All of our webinars have been led by experts in the field whose opinions may or may not reflect the association as a whole. CSA greatly appreciates the time and contributions of these speakers for volunteering to take part in these webinars and the questions and input from you, our audience members. We have everybody in listen-only mode on today's call. We do, however, want to get to know you and, of course, answer your questions. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're from and any project affiliations you want to share. When you do that, make sure that your to box is set to all panelists and attendees so everybody can learn from you. We also will be opening the Q&A box, and so if you have questions for our presenters, you can place them there as well. Leah will be helping to pull questions at the end. We should have a good amount of time for Q&A, so be thinking of those questions as our presenters go on. And with that, I'll turn it over to Leah Shanley, a senior fellow at the Nelson Institute at the University of Wisconsin and co-chair of our Law and Policy Working Group. Thank you.
Great, thanks Rihanna, much appreciated, and thank you all for joining us today. This is the last in a series of 8 webinars we've done over the course of the last year. So thanks to all who've been participating. Today's subject will be looking at the role of citizen science in global policy initiatives. The citizen science community is gaining global recognition and engagement through the formation of the Citizen Science Global Partnership, which is a network of networks that seeks to promote and advance citizen science for a sustainable world. The role of the CSGP will be different and complementary to existing regional citizen science associations. The networks developing within this partnership understand their unique potential to contribute across sectors and boundaries and at scale. The Global Partnership is now positioned to support the global discourse of citizen science practitioners, researchers, and others to create a mutually beneficial bridge across major global initiatives seeking to engage civil society. And as our speakers will talk about, engaging the United Nations Environment Program, UNESCO's recommendations on open science, and the recent discussions around the Aarhus Convention. So with that, I'm excited to introduce our distinguished speakers. The first will be Martin Brocklehurst, who's the co-chair of the Citizen Science Global Partnership Task Force on Governance, and a new board member of the European Citizen Science Association, also one of the founding members of the European Citizen Science Association. Then we'll have a short talk by Libby Hepburn, who's the co-chair of the Citizen Science Global Partnership Citizen Science and Open Science Community of Practice, as well as her co-chair Ute Venn, who also serves as a co-chair of the Citizen Science and Open Science Community of Practice. And Ute also is the principal investigator for We Observe, and my co-chair on the Group on Earth Observations GeoCit side. So with that, I'll hand it over to Martin.
Let me share my screen and then we'll get going. Okay. Let me just get this right. I want to begin my talk this evening by reminding you that we are at a critical time for humanity on our planet. If I can get the slides to move forward. And I'm having problems with my slides. There we go. Let me go back. Okay. Let me start again. My apologies for that. So I want to begin my talk by reminding you that we're at a critical time for humanity on our planet. I was staggered when these quotes were made about climate change, that they had such little influence on the global media and on ordinary people. Yet scientists are clear climate change is real and accelerating. Biodiversity decline is rapid and shows no signs of diminishing. Resource use is spiraling out of control. Poor air quality continues to kill millions every year. And we have now added to this list with a vicious global pandemic that has killed millions and shown just how interconnected our world now is. Yet only in the latter case have policymakers responded with the urgency needed, and then not in every country, as you will well know, in the US. I want to inspire you today that citizen science can make a difference and help solve these problems, drive policy change, and give our children a future. In 2019, I attended an inspirational meeting of the UN Science Policy Business Forum in Canberra, Australia, where citizen science was given a central platform with some of our biggest global companies, leading experts on remote sensing, and global leaders from the UN. I listened to the lack of progress on delivering the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and above all, the failure to drive down global carbon emissions. And I was struck by the view that science is not enough to convince our policymakers that rapid change is needed. At that time, the Australian bushfires were just starting. And as I flew home, I went over the Murray-Darling Basin for hours. And the consequences of climate change were crystal clear. Below me, Australia was experiencing its largest ever spring fires, the highest ever temperatures recorded, and a drought worse than the Millennium Drought of 1996 to 2010, itself one of the worst droughts in over 100 years. I could see no water for hours. Communities were running out of drinking water. Rivers that carried ocean-going vessels were dry, and the country was choking on smoke. And as I left, it got worse. And I was really taken by a quote at that time from a Dr. Tom Beer, who was a pioneering 1980s researcher into bushfires and climate change. He said, "I suppose I was young enough to believe that doing the science was going to be enough, and miraculously people would act on it. That was a naive view, but I think that was probably fairly common among working scientists. And this scientist briefed 4 Australian governments about the risk of bushfires and the impact of climate change. And whilst the fires were raging, advice was given to public officials not to discuss the link between climate change and bushfires. Australia was still in denial over the cause. If I needed more inspiration, that we needed more than scientific evidence to drive rapid policy change, this was it. It strengthened my belief that science is not enough. We need citizen science, and we need citizen science at scale to drive rapid policy change and to overcome entrenched economic interests that continue to deny reality as fake news. So I want to inspire you to get involved in citizen science, and in America, through the Citizen Science Association, and then at global level through the emerging Citizen Science Global Partnership. Make citizen science a powerful voice on the international stage. Give your time to building influence with global institutions to drive rapid policy change, and to work with regulators to deliver the evidence and behavior change that comes from implementing large-scale citizen science programs across the planet for critical areas of policy where our society needs to change. This is why the emergence of the Citizen Science Global Partnership, and the timeline is shown on this slide, is so important, because it provides the citizen science community with a voice on the global stage. And the Citizen Science Global Partnership has developed with guidance and support from the emerging citizen science associations which now exist in Europe, America, Australia, Asia, Africa, and a new association forming in South America. The Citizen Science Global Partnership was also developed with guidance and help from the UN. Its 5 foundational goals are outlined on this slide, and I won't go through them all. You can look at them in your own good time. But critical to me is the first point, which is to act as a coordinated point of entry for international organizations to the global citizen science community. And the value of this can already be seen in the way that the international community is changing its attitudes towards citizen science. In 2015, citizen science was not even in the vocabulary of the UN. Today, we are invited into the heart of the organization. This culminated in 2019 at UNEA 4, the highest environmental decision-making body on the planet, where citizen science was recognized as an unconventional data source that could make a significant contribution to the delivery of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And if you look down the slide, you'll see the reference to citizen science is in the second paragraph. This is important because it means that every environment minister on the planet has signed up to the declaration recognizing the role of citizen science. But for me, we can go further. It is my belief that we now have the opportunity to use the founding goals of the Citizen Science Global Partnership and build on the UN Declaration, to put in place a global convention on citizen science to be adopted as a resolution at either UNEA 5 in 2021 or UNEA 6 in 2023. Okay. But for me, even more importantly, is the need to coalesce around a number of global programs. The opportunity exists to pull together and draw in citizen science programs that everyone can take part on in the planet. My apologies, I've lost my notes. Let me carry on. What we're looking at is the potential for something like 10% of citizens in countries around the planet to take part in citizen science. And if you can imagine an opportunity where up to 10% of the global population takes part in citizen science, you will realize what a potential impact that could have on the policymakers in the global community. And what gives me confidence that that is possible is shown on this particular slide. This is an example from a project in Flanders where up to 5% of the population became involved in air quality monitoring. And this particular project has had a dramatic effect on the way air pollution is now perceived in Belgium. And at UNEA 4, I was talking to a number of people to explain to them how influential this particular project had been, when the Belgian ambassador came behind me to say, and even more so, it has had an impact on politics in the country. You cannot now engage in politics in Belgium and not be aware of the issue of citizen science. And a second example, to give you some idea of the scale that citizen science can reach, is the King's College London COVID-19 Symptom Tracker Citizen Science Programme, which has now drawn in over 4.5 million people within the UK. Nearly 7% of the population reporting and taking part in scientific research into the COVID-19 disease on a daily basis. And if you look at the facts at the bottom on the left of the slide, you'll see 4.5 million daily users, 200 million health data reports, 2 million test data coming in from the users, nearly 750,000 vaccine volunteers, 20 scientific papers, including prime research that has helped people understand early symptoms for the disease. And quite excitingly, they were able also to raise over £1 million to keep the programme running on crowdsourcing in a little over 2 weeks, not once, but twice. This at a time when the UK government was not supporting the programme financially. This particular programme has now expanded from the UK and is now also running in Sweden and the USA, and will shortly expand again to cover research into the effects of recently approved vaccines. What both of these programs illustrate for me is that when we bring health and environmental research together, ordinary people across the spectrum will engage in large numbers. So my final appeal for you all is to start your journey, donate your time to building citizen science programs that have the potential to go global, that can be attractive to the global north and the global south, and get involved with the Citizen Science Global Partnership and the Citizen Science Association in the messy business of influencing the strategic policy decisions of our time. You will be rewarded by being given the opportunity to meet the leaders of our time and to take part in some of the most influential meetings on the planet. I leave you with this last slide, taken from Earth Voyager, some 6.4 billion light years away, showing a tiny dot, a white dot in the distance, the only known inhabitable planet in our universe. And for me, as citizens, we must not let the light go out on this planet because of our inaction. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Martin, for an inspiring presentation. Rihanna will now show a video pre-recorded by Libby Hepburn, who is in Australia, and it's the middle of the night there, so we're doing this by video.
Hepburn, and I'm going to follow Martin's presentation on the development of the Citizen Science Global Partnership by talking about one of the initiatives that we're running under its umbrella now. And this is to do with the UNESCO recommendation on open science. And before May 2020, I hadn't heard of this, I have to admit. But we were invited by some of our UNESCO contacts to present a global view of citizen science in their draft recommendation. And when we looked at what they were proposing, we could see that this was a really important initiative, probably the most important initiative that's happened to science, and particularly to citizen science, that we've seen. And this is to do with its reach and its intentions. And what's important for citizen science is that a lot of what it talks about is to do with civil society and bringing civil society towards science and offering opportunities for engagement and involvement and working with it, and also fulfilling the human right to science. So right up the street of us in terms of the citizen science community. So we looked at this and we decided there is no one global citizen science community, nor one view to represent, nor one representative body. So we decided the best thing was to throw this open and see who was interested in being part of a community of practice to investigate the nexus of citizen science and open science, particularly with reference to the recommendation. And the best place for this was within the Citizen Science Global Partnership. And we were fortunate in that we'd been working for a number of years with a European model called We Observe, a model for developing communities of practice and working with them. And this model is interesting and really successful because it's all about co-creation. And it uses advanced, sophisticated and networked approaches, but based on the shared values that we have in citizen science to do with diversity, equity and inclusiveness. So all the methodologies, the management and the actions flow from these principles. So we were very happy to use that as a basis for what we were doing. So in May, we put out a call for people. And fortunately, we got 63 citizen science practitioners from across the world, as you can see, who were interested in this. And they had a huge range of experiences and ideas. And that was wonderful. And then UNESCO threw us another curveball and said that they wanted us to produce a short paper on citizen science and open science, and they wanted it in 3 weeks. So it was a bit of a crazy time, but we have developed this. It was a useful and worthwhile exercise. And if you'd like to see it, then this is on the Global Partnership website. And as well as offering a mechanism for us to talk to UNESCO and for UNESCO to talk to the citizen science global community, part of setting up working groups and communities of practice is that you get a huge enrichment from the people and the expertise that come towards these things. And I'd just like to talk to you about one particular one. This is Mariana Varese, who's worked for over 20 years with over 100 citizen science research groups across the Amazon basin, doing research and recording data on fish migrations and water quality. And as well as this being a magnificent project in itself, the ideas that inform the way that this is managed and the way that they work are things like the Open Collaborative Science and Development Network, which I again admit I'd never heard of before we did this work. And the diagram on the left is just one of the things that they've produced in Africa in terms of an approach to situated openness and how to work together. So very interesting and very educational for everybody who's involved. So we get the first draft of the Open Science recommendation in the middle of November. And what's in there, again, I recommend you look at it because it is an amazing roadmap or opportunity for citizen science within open science. There are so many things that apply to citizen science and will give citizen science a boost in here. The idea of developing an enabling policy environment for open science. Every nation that signs up to this, and there are usually 100 to 150 that sign up for it, report against how they've tried to put things in place to support this, the move in this direction. Investing in capacity building, investing in infrastructures for open science and services. And they're talking about 1% of GDP here. But another really important, radical, transformative thing is about the scientific culture. and taking away disincentives for open science by changing the reward and career mechanisms in science, which is really exciting in terms of changing attitudes. So working with this recommendation has given us significant challenges for our global citizen science community, huge opportunities, but we've got to look at how we can work with this, how we can maximize the opportunities. What is it that we can do to help to make sure that we make the most of this opportunity? And one thing that's particularly emerging from what we're being asked to do these days is to support emerging and global South citizen science communities to benefit from the recommendation and from what happens in terms of that. And that's not an easy, but it's a really important challenge that we can be involved with. And how do we do this? Well, what's wonderful about citizen science and citizen science globally, and what we're seeing in terms of a lot of open science as well, is that the work that we do and the way we approach it is based on principles and values that we hold in common. And that the methodologies and management and actions from those, they flow from those principles. And that, I think, makes what we do really in alignment with what UNESCO is looking for in terms of its open science recommendation. So when we look at this in terms of what citizen science globally needs, it makes the work that we're doing to establish the global partnership even more relevant. It needs a hub for national and regional associations to collaborate. We want to promote our advanced networked approaches. There needs to be a bridge for major global initiatives to the civil society, and channels for discourse across sectors and boundaries. And we want to represent and enhance the interests of all levels of practitioners into the mainstream science. And we want to promote opportunities for scaling and spreading citizen science and global standards, guidelines, and tools. So before I go, I'd just like to give you a couple of questions, not for answering now, but I'd love you to have a think about how you might respond to the opportunities for the US citizen science in the UNESCO recommendation, and how we and you can maximize opportunities, and how the global partnership can translate your achievements more widely. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you, and I'd love to speak with you again on this.
Wonderful, thank you all, and fabulous set of presentations. Before we go into Q&A, I'd like to now turn to Uta Venn, who perhaps want to add some comments as one of the co-chairs of the Citizen Science and Open Science Community of Practice.
Thank you very much, Leah, and thank you for having me here. Yes, I think Libby already introduced the community of practice as such in terms of linking into global policy making. I think this is a nice example how the citizen science community is actually linking into global policy on science policy, because at the end of the day, that's what UNESCO is doing right now, is reframing science policy that then, of course, then feeds down into the member states. And pretty much like citizen science itself, we also find ourselves in a participatory process there that actually extends over time. Indeed, we had initially been invited to provide this short paper. We've been invited to a number of the regional consultations that UNESCO has held on different continents over the summer. And we're currently preparing a statement from this community of practice, which by now features more than 100 practitioners from around the globe. So I think this is a really nice example of how the community actually finds itself in a policymaking process and finds opportunities to feed into that process and provide evidence into the policymaking process. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Uta. So we've got a few questions. If folks would add their questions, if you can find it, the Q&A icon at the bottom, you can click on that and enter your question. I'll be reading some of those questions there. Or you can type in your question at the bottom of the chat. box. I'll also look for questions in that place. So to get started, we've got some new folks on the webinar, which is exciting. But the term citizen science is new to a few folks. So they were asking a couple of things. One, could we perhaps compare and contrast citizen science with platforms like Kaggle and open data initiatives led by local governments? And two, a related question is, does citizen science include participating in research as a human subject? So I know the community has various definitions of what citizen science is. And here in the US, particularly under the federal legislation, we include citizen science as the contributions of the public to scientific research, to engineering research, and monitoring the full spectrum of the scientific process. But I'm going to hand this to Uta to answer, because I think from her perspective, she might be able to give some good contextual information on the definition of citizen science.
Thanks, Leah. Yes, indeed, there are many definitions around, and it depends who you ask. How long is a piece of string is how we might define citizen science. But as you said, I think the most important part is to really stress that it opens up the scientific process to involvement of the public at any stage, whether it's defining the research question, and getting involved in data collection, which is the most prominent example that I think that springs to many people's mind, or in the subsequent stages in terms of analyzing data, doing outreach, actually doing something with the results. So from the particular examples that came up in the chat also, when you participate as a subject in your own research, that's a really good question. I think the answer will differ depending on who you ask, and we actually have a current effort, of course, going on to define what are the characteristics of citizen science, and to what extent you really need to be actively involved. At least you need to be aware, that you're being researched on, and we can debate whether being a human subject that signs up, for example, now testing a COVID-19 vaccine, makes you a subject of research, or actually an active participant in contributing risks or part of your health to the process.
Yeah, I like to think of it, that you make that distinction between active contribution versus perhaps more passive contribution. And so when we think of projects like uBiome or others where the participant is helping with the data collection, maybe now we have Fitbit monitors, right? And other kinds of mobile tracking. We're actively participating in that data collection versus going into a clinic and letting someone, draw the information, then they go off and do the science. But as you said, it depends on your perspective. Eric brings up the question of Kaggle, and I believe that's more like hackathons and datathons and open data initiatives. So citizen science certainly could participate in open data initiatives or participate in hackathons or datathons. But we maybe think of it as an overlapping Venn diagram, with citizen science being one of many kinds of participatory approaches in open innovation or in open science. So let's see, Brandon, who has been an active contributor to the PPS core standards work, which we're really thankful for. He says, what do you see as the immediate needs of the organization? So by the organization, I'm going to take that to mean the Citizen Science Global Partnership. And how can people get involved? And so we've got kind of a twofold question there. One, the larger partnership, and two, then specifically the open science community of practice. So I'm going to give Martin a chance to jump in, and then Uta will go to you.
Okay, these are fair questions to put to us at this stage. We're currently at the point of establishing the Citizen Science Global Partnership as a new an independent NGO, and the reason for doing that is so that we can formally register with the United Nations, and that means that we will have a secretariat, we will have full-time staff and an office and a location. The details of where that location will be are still being worked out, but it is highly likely that we will have offices in the US, within Europe, and also within Switzerland, close to the UN headquarters. We're also having a debate as to whether we have just the associations as members, or whether we have the associations plus individual members. And my own preference is the latter. But I think at this point, the easiest way to get involved with the Citizen Science Global Partnership is to come in through your local association in America, through the CSA, express an interest in taking part in some of the working groups, and you will get a steer as to how you can put your individual support into the organization. We will then be looking at how we take forward our aspirations to try to get citizen science associations set up globally where they don't exist at the moment. So we spend quite a lot of time encouraging our African colleagues to set up a point of focus for the African continent. We're seeing that emerge now in South America, and we will be nurturing the new associations to strengthen them and draw people in. But for me, the most exciting thing for the new body to try to do is to pick up the very best examples of citizen science from national level and see how we can franchise those across the world and grow them in scale. Because if you really want to influence global policy, you can do it in one of two ways. You can do it through your national government, through the data sets that you can collate and research that you can undertake in your own nation, or you can do it by coming together across nations to put in place genuine global data sets. And it's that latter one that really excites me. Just imagine we took the Kurenhuisen air quality program and we franchised that across the globe to all the other countries that have got major urban air quality problems. The power that that has in terms of the data sets that you generate to drive change is enormous. And especially if you can draw in 7 to 10% of the population in each region that takes part, it becomes impossible to ignore. And the other thing from the Flanders that they learned is that not only do you add data, add knowledge to science, but you also start to change people's behaviors. People start to look at why the problem is occurring, what their role in it has been, and how they might make a contribution to reduce the air quality problems that they're experiencing. So there's a few thoughts, I think, Leah, in answer to that particular question.
So is there a place, I know you say at the moment it's through the associations, is there going to be maybe a monthly newsletter that could be coming out so that free flow of information directly from the partnership that people could at least be getting regular updates on, or maybe an email subscription they could sign up to?
That will start, and there is a website, and we can put the website up in the chat if you'd like to do that, Leah, where people can find the website, which will tell you what is actually happening. But literally, as we are speaking, we are drawing up the Articles of Association for the Citizen Science Global Partnership, and we expect it to be registered as a formal body by April next year. So we are really at that formative stage, and we're being supported in that process by all the existing citizen science associations across the planet. So that's the best way I can suggest directly to come in, and there is an email address on there where you can register your interest.
Wonderful. Thank you, Martin. And Uta.
Yes, I wanted to come in. Indeed, a lot of the governance structure of the CSGP is still being drawn up. Having said that, currently the CSGP has already 3 concrete projects that it's working on. So the citizen science and the SDGs, the global mosquito alert, and also ourselves with this community of practice on citizen science and open science, because the world does move on. And so this is what we're creating as projects so that we are able to work on thematic issues. So I would share in the chat how people can concretely get involved in any 3 of the projects, but of course I'll be very glad if you choose to join the community of practice on citizen science and open science.
Well, what I would like to share with you on one of those projects that Uta mentioned, which is Global Mosquito Alert, is that I almost got a shiver down my spine when we brought the interested parties together to look at what was going on across the planet on monitoring the distribution of disease-carrying mosquitoes. Most of the examples were taken from Europe and North America, and they're related to things like the Zika virus that was moving in with the tiger mosquito as it migrated as a result of climate change. But when we put those people alongside folk living in parts of the global south that already had the diseases, already had the mosquito populations, and didn't have the knowledge on where the major problems were, their answer to us was, we really don't care about how you bring these programs together. We just want to take the best examples that you've got and apply them straight away tomorrow, because people are dying in our countries from these diseases. And what you already have developed in the global north can be applied straight away in our own countries to help solve some of the problems that we've got. And we had a lovely example in Pakistan, taking the project from Spain verbatim, translating it with open science principles, open software, open hardware, and applying that project in Pakistan. And that's what we want to see more of, I think, across the Citizen Science Global Partnership.
Wonderful. So we've got a question here from Dilek Frizel at IASA in Austria. She says, Martin, could you please provide some information on the Global Partnership's vision for the Sustainable Development Goals? And then once Martin has offered his thoughts, I might also then turn to Uteb, who's also been very active around the SDGs in citizen science.
Okay, let me try and come back on that one again. If you look at there's a paper that was written by IASA in Nature, and I'm sure that Dilek would be happy to put that into the chat, because what that does is it identifies the main areas where citizen science can impact the 250 areas of monitoring that are going on to deliver the SDGs. So although there's a list of SDGs, they break down into these 250 areas. And what you find across the planet is that many countries are struggling to report against the SDGs. So just a simple example would be the water quality issue. If you're in parts of Africa, the number of data points on water quality are extremely limited. So if you look at the vision of what we would have, it would be to try again to take some of the examples from the developed world that are perhaps using satellite imagery to work out what the water quality is on the ground, then supported by ground truthing by citizen scientists, and roll out that best practice to other parts of the planet so that they can build that into the way that they report against the SDGs. Because if you can't measure it, you don't really know whether you're meeting the objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we've started to look at what they call the tier 3 areas of the targets that have been set for the SDGs, which are the areas where there isn't a methodology agreed and the data does not yet exist to help them report against the SDGs. And that's where we're trying to concentrate our global efforts and be focused on 2 or 3 areas to really show the power of citizen science.
Wonderful. Thank you, Martin. And Uta.
Yes, thank you. And indeed, I think we should highlight Dilek's work here. Indeed, it's in terms of actually mapping where citizen science could already is making a contribution to monitoring progress towards achieving the SDGs. And since we're talking about this relationship between citizen science and policy, the SDGs, of course, we can see as a global policy framework. And there, you know, I think it's nice to use this particular example also to say there is this dynamic of top down and bottom up, and yeah. Too often we consider, well, we have this global framework, you know, now we just need to get citizen scientists to deliver data to us. But actually, what we find when we look at the more community-driven work in citizen science, community-based monitoring, etc., working with local communities, indigenous communities, indeed. That's another form of citizen science. It really starts with local problems and people's issues, and they don't think in terms of SDG frameworks or targets or goals. They think, you know, of the resources that they have to live with, the means within which they have to provide sustainable livelihoods, etc. And that's where we really have to try and find bridges and make ends meet, and pick people up where they are in terms of the issues that are prevalent in their local communities, and see how that can nevertheless feed into the national, very formal monitoring schemes.
Wonderful, thank you. And if you notice, folks, in the side box in the chat, Dilek has added a link to the Nature paper that begins to map out the role of citizen science contributions to the SDGs. Steve McFeely says he wouldn't concentrate on tier 3 indicators. They don't exist anymore. The last tier 3 indicators were reclassified in November 2019. So perhaps we need to follow up with Steve on that one. And then we have some folks here. Eric has asked another great question. He says, has there been any discussion around where the global data sets will be housed? So Martin and others in the Global Partnership have rightly said it's time to scale up citizen science from the local to the national, to the supranational, to the global. But then where will we store that data? He suggests that cross-hosting smaller data sets on GitHub, for example, which is a fabulous idea. And I've had some conversations with the guys that run GitHub, and there is interest there. There's also discussions around creating a citizen science cloud, but that gets into the private sector cloud providers, and then we've got concerns over privacy, etc. Would either you, Martin, or Ute like to comment on this question?
Well, I think I'm not an expert on the way that you handle data, but it is an issue, a big issue for us all, is that you have interoperability between data systems. What we've started to do as a Citizen Science Global Partnership is talk with the UN about the way that the UN draws data in to answer the questions around the SDGs. And one of the things that we want to move forward on is a partnership with the UN on how you set up the data and metadata standards to enable the UN to draw in the citizen science data either directly or through the national statistical offices. And there is debate going on with the World Data Forum around, again, these type of issues as to how you bring unconventional data sources into the conventional data systems of national governments. And it's a long process, and I don't pretend I've got all the answers at this point in time. And I don't know whether Ute would like to add any further to that.
Yeah, just briefly to say, indeed, it's a matter not only of where data is stored, but interoperability. That's a topic, of course, Leah, that you and I touch upon within the GEO citizen science and Earth observation community activity that intersects with the We Observe community of practice on interoperability and standardization, that has launched interoperability experiments to work out exactly that, how you can ensure interoperability across different data sets, particularly citizen science data sets. And we have a prevalent project in the European context, the Cost for Clouds, which is a cloud infrastructure for citizen observatories to get interoperability across different citizen observatory initiatives. So I think there's no shortage of initiatives, but it's indeed an issue that's taking time to resolve.
The one other thought I would offer is one of the other dilemmas, I think, of citizen science, and it was something that was said to me by a national statistical office, is that too many citizen science projects are short-lived. They are project funded, and they are 3 to 5 years. So they produce good data for a short period of time, and then they disappear. And there is no longevity to the program that is running. And we have to find a way beyond that. We have to recognize that really good citizen science projects will run for long periods of time. And we have to find the mechanisms and the ways to fund those particular activities. And they do exist. There are long-term programs in citizen science that are built up over many years, but they tend to be those projects that have got embedded into the national regulatory machinery or the national reporting obligations. And we need a little bit more of that, but at the same time not to expect citizens necessarily to want to contribute to all the programs that governments are running. I go back to the comment that Ute was making. There has to be an interest for the citizens at local level to want to take part. And you have to feed information back to people who are taking part to make them want to continue to take part in your programs. The very worst thing you can do is to set up a citizen science program that demands things of citizens and gives nothing back. It doesn't last. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? I'm not seeing any others questions coming up in the Q&A box. Steve McFeely notes in the chat box, he says, the time series is an issue, but NSS must grapple with this, and many big data are not comparable over the long term, so this should not be a barrier. Steve, might I invite you to turn on your mic and maybe add a little more context information, because I think you're making some interesting points here.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so I'm just making the point there. So the point that the speaker was making, that one of the criticisms of citizen science data might be that they don't exist for a long term. This is a problem with big data as well, because even if the data exist, because platform providers are changing the IT systems behind the data, it actually means the data aren't comparable over time. And but there's no argument that we shouldn't use big data either. So I'm just saying, I don't think that in itself should be a barrier. I think that's something that national statistical systems are going to have to grapple with, because I think a lot of new data sources aren't going to have the time series consistency that they've been used to with primary data. So rather than it being a problem for citizen science, I think that's more a problem for national statistical systems, because this is one of the characteristics of future data.
And one of the big discussions in the global partnership through the work that Martin and others are doing with the UN is around how to collaborate better with the national statistical offices. Martin and Steve, and Uta, do you want to comment a little bit more on that and the efforts underway?
I think the issue with the national statistical offices is, first of all, it's a problem that they have with all unconventional data sources. It isn't just citizen science. If you look at remote sensing, there's another unconventional data source that has the same problem in getting into the National Statistical Office reporting mechanisms. What we are seeing, however, is through the World Data Forum, and we've attended 2 of their global meetings, an acceptance that they have to take this data in and to find ways to do it in such a way that they are content with the accuracy and the quality of the data that they receive. And it's not as if citizen science isn't already in some of the national statistical data sets. It is, but often it's not recognized. The metadata tags don't recognize it as citizen science data. And some of the biological recording data, for instance, that goes in the UK is citizen science data. Some of the data on invasive diseases of trees is citizen science data, but it gets lost in the amalgamation process of the data sets that it actually came from citizen scientists in the first place. So it is beginning to have an impact. We just need to work at those relationships, understand what the data requirements are of the national statistical offices, and provide that data for them. Having said that, I would go back in a way to the symptom tracker I introduced in my presentation. It's very interesting that this particular data set that is now being obtained by 4.5 million people every day, who in turn get back every day local data on the incidence of the disease where they live, that data set is something like 2 to 3 weeks ahead of all the official data reporting. So that gives, if you like, the national data sets a real problem, because it's telling people before the government has actually announced what the position is with that particular disease, what is happening in their locality. And there's a tension there. And I know this from my own work, because I used to work on collecting national data sets, that politicians like to have the answers to what the data sets are telling them. And if somebody's coming in with another data set 3 weeks earlier than the official data sets, it creates difficulties for the politicians. So we have to be cognizant of those issues. And I think it's why the Symptom Tracker app was not initially supported by the national government in England. And I can tell you at local level, I could not get support for it from our local health boards for that very reason, because they weren't in control of the data set. And you think of that in an American scenario of a government having an independent data set coming in, giving you different messages to the ones that are coming out of the official data sets. It's a tricky relationship.
So I need to be mindful of the time. I'll ask Uta, do you have any last comments? And then we'll go over to Rihanna to close.
Right, just to comment on, follow on from what Martin said, the delimiter I'd like to start with, that when we talk about citizen science and the relationship to national statistics offices, we inevitably reduce citizen science as a source of data. It's much more, and I think we've touched upon that. Having said that, indeed, we need to work on these relationships, and the interest is there. I think we're creating those relationships. There's openness from many national statistics offices to consider what citizen science can offer, actually what it is. So we're seeing that there's this interest to learn more about citizen science, similar to some of the questions we've seen pop in here in the webinar. And again, that we observe a community of practice on this relationship between citizen science and the SDGs is a very good example where that dialogue is already happening between citizen science practitioners really doing citizen science work in the field, but also national statistics offices, etc. And we can add the information, of course, in the chat for people who are interested to join that particular community of practice.
Wonderful. Thank you, both Martin and Uta and Libby and Steve and others, Eric, others who've asked great questions and contributed in the chat. Brandon, really active discussion today. Wonderful. So I want to wish you all a happy holiday season, a healthy and happy and prosperous new year. And please look for the Citizen Science Law and Policy Working Group. We welcome all people who are interested. We also have smaller discussions with experts in the field around the law and policy issues of citizen science every month. So please join us there. With that, I'll hand it over to Rihanna. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Leah, and everyone for an engaging presentation. Really appreciate you organizing this and coming to speak today, everyone. Just a quick reminder about our 2021 convening. We're really excited to be able to host more engaging conversations like this in a new format. We'll have lots of great discussion opportunities and lots of opportunities for presentations. Instead of individual talks, we're going to be doing some unique things with virtual posters. And so there will be lots of opportunities to present your work, share, get feedback. We will be having a Q&A session on our poster proposals on Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern, so similar time for folks across the globe. If you're able to tune in, then you can learn more about our vision for virtual posters. We also have information about our virtual workshop series that will be a key component of our 2021 event, and you can find all of that on the website that I linked in the chat. Again, thank you everybody, and hopefully we'll see you again soon in another virtual event with CSA. Thank you.